Hello and welcome to this news hour. I'm Daniel Kasahun with the news. While the new pressure and the Western media frenzy continues, some global media outlets have opted to remain silent until the government admitted that it conducted airstrikes against military targets in Mekelle. And that has also opted to echo the cries of TPLF while turning a blind eye toward civilian deaths in South Wollo and Wuchale as a result of TPLF attack. Western media supporting on the conflict both in northern Ethiopia and the rest of the country has been unbalanced and consistently biased against Ethiopia. For the details, here is Farolago.
The Ethiopian National Defense Force conducted an airstrike on military targets in Mekelle on Monday. Following this, there were some deliberate misinterpretations and misrepresentations being circulated by some international media outlets. Ethiopian Current Fact Check says, contrary to the misrepresentation, the National Defense Force airstrikes have specifically targeted TPLF arms production or manufacturing and armament repair sites. These media outlets crying about civilians dying in Mekelle while disregarding civilian deaths in South Wollo and Wuchale inflicted by the terrorist TPLF shows the fact that they still do not care about journalistic principles and impartiality.
Now that the TPLF are showing their true colors, they're stuck. Because it's like, okay, are these guys, we can't portray them as heroes anymore because they're slaughtering people, very obviously slaughtering people. What are we going to do? Second thing is, there are the media that go, well, that's okay, we can go ahead with showing the both side-isms because it's Africa. Because, of course, it's ethnic, and, oh, the Africans are killing each other. Now, so we are at a very interesting point in the media narrative where these guys have to either step up and be responsible journalists, or they are going to try to keep pushing the narrative that they bought into. They bought this lie. Are they going to stick with it or not? Quite frankly, I can't tell you which, but it's going to be sure as hell interesting, because nobody wants to say, I was fooled, I was duped, I made a mistake, these guys lied to me. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to be the chump. But they're going to have to.
This has led journalists to come to the conclusion that some Western nations, with the help of their media, are more concerned about regime change rather than the suffering of innocent civilians.
These Western powers have a clearly visible agenda against Ethiopia, the Ethiopian government, and the Ethiopian people. That is essentially to effect a regime change in Ethiopia, because we can see these interests of the Western powers in their statements here and there.
The U.S. foreign policy makers came up with a doctrine that the U.S. should secure what's called a preponderance of influence over all countries, meaning having a plan to change a regime of any country not under the direct control of the United States.
While doing so, they are intentionally or unintentionally being patronizing toward Ethiopia.
These European saviors, these governments posturing as European saviors of a Black African nation. Samantha Power, I think I told you at the beginning, she called a high ministerial meeting of white saviors from all the European countries and the United States and Japan, which is more or less part of that bloc. I mean, I really think he should just speak out as to how ridiculous and patronizing and presumptuous this is.
Drawing on this entire, one can conclude that these media outlets were also hoping that the TPLF's advance in pockets of South Wollo would materialize.
The Ethiopian Human Rights Council suggests the government to capacity democratic institutions and ensure rule of law across the nation. The council highlighted gaps observed during the country's general election, which is the 6th general election, conducted in June and September. Kasanjani reports.
Established back in 1991, the Ethiopian Human Rights Council has been playing its share in ensuring rule of law, democratization, and the respect of human rights in the country. In his preliminary report about the 6th general elections, Executive Director of the Ethiopian Human Rights Council mentioned the gaps observed during the country's general elections conducted in June and September.
We have been, mobilizing, organizing our voters, trainers, and also election observers. With our election observers, we have been engaged in all election process, the previous one, and as well as the September 20 election, and as well as the referendum, actually. So with our observation, we have seen some gaps or some irregularities that includes minors engaging in election process, whereby they have the election card, and then we have been observing while they cast their vote, but they are minor. So according to the law, they cannot vote until they reach the age of 18. That is one gap. The other gap, the security personnel, like the police, were closely engaged in election station activities. For example, like picking up a ballot box and moving it here and there. The other thing is election executors were acting beyond their mandate. Like guiding and telling the voters to vote for a specific party, which is against the law. The other thing is our observers in some areas were unable to observe their duty. Even in some polling stations, they were kicked out.
The executive director suggested the government to capacitate democratic institutions and ensure rule of law across the nation.
But there were actually a positive, pointers that can be appreciated. That includes like the voters' turnout. People were engaged, enthusiastically. And also, for example, the IDP's election center or IDPs were able to choose, with a specially established IDP's polling stations, which we would like to really appreciate because Ethiopia has already ratified the Kampala Convention. So according to the Kampala Convention, and as well as the NEBE, regulations, IDPs were, given the right to have their own specially established polling stations. That's what we have been observing. They were able to cast their ballot with specially established polling stations. So these are the main pointers that can be, appreciated.
According to him, the council would like to see more independent, more vibrant, and more active democratic institutions.
The Ethiopian government has a duty, to make the democratic process progressive. To do this, the government has to take bold steps, which actually many of it has already been started, like the reform that we are observing at the national human rights institutions, like the Commission, the Ombudsman, as well as the Ethiopian Electoral Board the reform that we are seeing is really something to be appreciated. The same goes to the judiciary. Our recommendation would be the government need to enhance, need to add more energy and some other bold steps so that we would and the country at large would enjoy the true and genuine democracy.
It was also noted that the Ethiopian Human Rights Council would celebrate its 13th anniversary.
Spokesperson of the Ethiopian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Dina Moftsey, said dissolution of a recent meeting of the European Union without any agreement manifests self-centered countries' failure to win alliance from others that are in a rational position. The breakup of the meeting of EU member countries that was intended to impose sanctions on Ethiopia apparently shows cogent countries indifferent to those that are calculating only their benefits at the expense of others, the spokesperson explained. Dina elaborated that some countries' position on Ethiopia is biased and groundless, calling them to reconsider their stance for the sake of truth.